Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Excellus Blue Cross Blue Shield, believing that everyone deserves to be cared for and to live well. Through community investments, partnerships, and education, Excellus Blue Cross Blue Shield is working to address health inequities. More at excellusbcbs.com.
From WXXI News, this is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. Our connection this hour was made at Columbia University with the burgeoning academic career of a student named Chunjin Lee. On paper, Lee looks like a model student. High-scoring essays, excellent grades. But New York Magazine found maybe a different reality in profiling Lee for their piece, and their piece is titled, "Everyone is Cheating Their Way Through College." The piece details how students are now using ChatGPT in almost every classroom, for really almost every assignment, everywhere. Here's how it describes Lee. Quote, Lee used ChatGPT to help write the essay that got him into Columbia University, and then proceeded to use generative artificial intelligence to cheat on nearly every assignment. As a computer science major, he depended on AI for his introductory programming classes. I just dumped the prompt into ChatGPT and hand him whatever it spat out, he said. By his rough math, AI wrote 80% of every essay he turned in. At the end, I'd put on the finishing touches, he said. I just insert 20% of my humanity, my voice, into it. When asked why he had gone through so much trouble to get into an Ivy League university, only to offload all of the learning to a robot, he said, well, it's the best place to meet your co-founder and your wife, end quote. But don't scoff, Lee did indeed meet his co-founder. In fact, they created a company expressly designed to teach people how to use AI to cheat on all kinds of things. Back to the piece now. Quote, they found success by creating the ultimate cheat tool for remote coding interviews. Lee posted a video of himself on YouTube using it to cheat his way through an internship interview with Amazon. He actually got the internship, but turned it down. Lee and his co-founder raised $5.3 million from investors for one more AI-powered app, and Lee says they'll target the standardized test used for graduate school admissions, as well as all campus assignments, quizzes, and tests. It will enable you to cheat on pretty much everything. That's the tagline. End quote. So what does Columbia say about this? Well, they put Lee on disciplinary probation, but not necessarily for cheating in his classes. He was disciplined for the apps he created, designed to help others cheat. But Lee tells New York Magazine he thinks that's hypocritical because Columbia University has a partnership with ChatGPT's parent company, OpenAI. Why, Lee wonders, is he being punished for working with AI so successfully if his school has a direct relationship with it? OpenAI even made a special version of ChatGPT called ChatGPT Plus, and it's free to college students during finals week. But OpenAI stresses their goal is to help students use it responsibly, not to use it to cheat. Lee thinks that's silly. He says he doesn't know a single student at Columbia who isn't using AI to cheat, and he thinks that's mostly fine. He says, quote, I think we are years or months probably away from a world where nobody thinks using AI for homework is considered cheating anymore, end quote. Lee was not alone in this piece. A student in Utah told the magazine, quote, college is just how well I can use ChatGPT at this point, end quote. She recently captioned a video of herself copy and pasting a chapter from her genocide and mass atrocity textbook into ChatGPT. She told the magazine that using ChatGPT to do everything for you has, so far, essentially no consequences. Students are even using ChatGPT to write their essays in ethics classes. This summer, we are reaching out to colleges and universities across our region, not the Ivy Leagues, but schools around here, asking for an update on their AI and cheating policies. We're going to report back in the coming weeks when we collect more data from schools about what they are doing. But today we open the conversation with a discussion that examines the impact of a rapidly changing higher ed world. One where, as New York Magazine says, almost everyone is cheating. Let's see if that's hyperbole. My guests this hour include Dr. Kyle Green. Kyle is Associate Professor in the Department of Sociology at SUNY Brockport. Welcome to the program. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for inviting me.
Natasha Kaiser is a rising senior in the photojournalism program at RIT and an intern with WXXI News, who we are proud to say is doing outstanding work. Welcome back to the program here.
Thank you for having me again.
Natasha, is everyone cheating in college? Is everyone cheating their way through college?
I don't think that's true.
Not everyone.
I don't think I could even be convinced if someone had data on that. That is not what we read in that article was not indicative of what students are doing. I know myself and other students, like almost every student I know, we're not using ChatGPT. We're not using generative AI for our assignments. And if we are, I'm not not aware of it, right? Because it's not what the actual student body is doing. This is a small sample size at an Ivy League institution, and it sometimes reeks of entitlement within that article about we should be allowed to use this. And Chung-In Lee, I don't think he's a good example of this, right? With his own new company, the slogan is cheat on everything, but in his LinkedIn article that I read this morning, he said it's not cheating.
Yeah, I know. It comes off as sensationalistic, hyperbolic, and Kyle was saying before the program, and I want to give you some space to talk about this. If we fixate on the Ivy Leagues, what happens, Kyle?
Yeah, I want to second what Natasha's saying to start. And I would say if I were someone who were creating an app that was based on helping students cheat, and if I were using generative AI, what I would say is everyone's doing it. So I don't know if that's the best person to listen to. That's part of the pitch. Everyone's doing it, so let's do it better. And this is one of my general frustrations when looking at higher education. Over and over, we fixate on what's happening at the Ivy League school. And that could be in the case of looking at something like AI. It could be looking at something about the student experience. It could be looking at something like student protests. But over and over, we only look at Ivy League schools. It's an okay starting point, but even if you look at the numbers, and I'm guilty here because I did the Google search, and the first search result that comes up is AI. So if these numbers are not right, then
Indeed.
it's proof of the problems with AI. But Ivy Leagues, 65,000 students. That's the enrollment that we have every year, every Ivy League combined. If we look at CUNY by itself, 240,000. If we look at SUNY by itself, 377,000. So if we're trying to talk about the student experience, and we're only looking at the Ivy League schools, and we're not looking at the SUNY schools like SUNY Brockport, we're not looking at RIT, and you hear someone say every student is cheating, that's a bad starting point.
I think that is a very fair point. Now I want to set that aside and ask you, maybe granting both of your point that there is hyperbole in the title of this piece, there's hyperbole in the idea that everyone is cheating. However, are we in this paradigm shift where there has to be something that higher ed is doing to deal with this?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, and it is getting more common. Every professor has their horror stories. And I, just on the walk over here, I thought of 5 different examples of the type of ways that students are using AI. And they're all very different also. So we're collapsing them under this category. And I think we get fixated a little bit too much on what counts as cheating. It's also the same problem that I have with people using the word plagiarism over and over. And then we end up with some sort of philosophical debate or linguistic debate about what those terms mean. But we do have to consider, here's a technology that's available. It's very seductive to students. Even, and I talked to Natasha before the conversation about this, even for students who outwardly say, we don't want to use AI, we don't like the growth of AI, it's very, very tempting because it is a powerful tool. So it is getting more common, and we have to figure out what we're going to do in the classroom.
And just reading from the piece in New York Magazine about at least what schools, again, maybe in the narrow focus of an Ivy League, but generally what schools are doing, here's what New York Magazine says. Columbia's policy on AI is similar to that of many other universities. Students are prohibited from using it unless their professor explicitly permits them to do so, either on a class-by-class or a case-by-case basis, end quote. Is that accurate where you are?
It's a little bit different. It's similar but different. So SUNY has a larger policy, and if you look at SUNY's policy, it's very vague, and it's focused more on innovation and growth. So how do we partner with AI? So it almost seems very supportive of the growth of this type of technology and tool, but then they punt it down to all the individual SUNY schools. And so each university gets to come up with a policy. The universities often do exactly what SUNY's doing, which is push it down to the classroom. So what Brockport says is, whereas artificial intelligence exists, therefore be it resolved that inappropriate use of artificial intelligence as deemed by the instructor is considered a violation of the university's academic dishonesty policy, and that all instructors must include a statement on the use of artificial intelligence in their course syllabus. So basically they say nothing other than your professor has to tell you how they treat AI, and then you must follow their lead.
Okay. Natasha, what is your experience as a student at RIT about the discussion about AI and what's inbounds and out of bounds?
Yeah, I don't think it's interesting because our own institution uses it for like marketing materials and promotional materials, and the student body has said, and we've made, our Paw Prints petition, which is basically a student makes a petition to say, something that they want changed, 250 students sign it, the institution has to respond, right? The institution, from my knowledge, has not responded to the students' response to AI usage instead of commissioning their own students. And within the classroom, I know that professors have told me that, you can use it, but you have to ask first for certain classes, right? So in my photojournalism classes, it would never be okay. We can't generate images. We can't use it for prompts for, stories that we do. That's just off the table. But I know in my non-photojournalism classes, right, in marketing classes, in even in ethics classes, we talked about the use of like generative content and how it is infiltrating the student body and journalism, and we don't use it. But I know, and I assume it's your experience too, that in those certain non-journalism related courses, sometimes they allow it to see what comes of it. But I've never used it before in a class.
So before I get to some feedback that we already have, and people, I know people want to talk about this. You can call the program toll free to do that, 844-295-TALK. It's 844-295-8255. 263-WXXI if you call from Rochester, 263-9994. You can email the program, connections@wxxi.org. If you're watching on YouTube, on the WXXI News YouTube channel, you can join the chat there. We're going to be talking about this in various ways throughout the summer as we kind of, a lot of schools are sort of taking stock and looking at their own policies and trying to figure out, are we comfortable with this policy? Do we need to make changes? And I want to hear from students. I want to hear from teachers. I want to hear from all stakeholders in this. Before I get to some of your feedback that has already come in, I want to ask Kyle and Natasha, you've talked about what the policy sort of is, or you're kind of feeling your way in the dark on where you are now. Kyle, I'm going to ask you to write the policy, though. What should the policy be on using AI, using ChatGPT?
For me, the most important thing is transparency. And this is why I don't like the term plagiarism. Plagiarism gets into this question of, are you stealing someone else's work? I don't know if using AI should count as that. And if it does count as that, it's because a few steps along the way where you're saying, well, these AI companies are engaging in data scraping and they're taking people's ideas and then they're putting forth to the student and you're using them. I don't know if a student actually cares about that. What's more important to me is academic integrity or transparency. Where are these ideas coming from? For me, the point of the classroom is for you to develop your own voice, to think through ideas, to be wrong sometimes, to figure out what you actually believe, to figure out how to use data to build an argument. So if you're using AI as a source of data, and I push against this pretty strongly in my classroom, so we can talk about why I push against it, but if you are going to use it, you have to be clear about how you're using it. If it's a student who speaks English as a second language, if it's a student who's not confident in their writing, and then they use that program to help with sentence structure, fine. I would tell them, don't do that, but if you're going to, let me know. Because then when I read it and it feels like AI and I get that sense it's AI, or if I plug it into a program that tells me it's 70% AI, I know what you are actually doing. If you use AI to generate an outline that you then go from, tell me that as well, because then I can get a better sense of what you're doing. I can also provide better feedback. If the goal is for you to grow as a student, as a thinker, to build skills that you can take out into the world, I need to know what you're actually doing. So the policy I put forth is, here's the reasons I personally don't use AI. And I list a number of reasons, including the damage to the environment, how much energy is being used, how uncertain we are about how these programs actually work. So I lay out the reasons that I'm hesitant about it. But then I say the most important thing is you have to be transparent about what you're doing. And then we can go from there. That has to be the starting point.
Okay, Natasha?
Yeah, kind of going off of what you just said, transparency is the most important, because I think we have gotten past the point of being able to completely ban AI in the classrooms. Unfortunately, I just don't think it's possible anymore. It is so...
And abstinence policies so rarely work in
Exactly.
any, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's so embedded in our culture now. I mean, Google has its own AI feature, Gemini, right? Like, even if you're not actively trying to use AI, you might be using it and you don't even realize. And I think we have passed that point of no return with completely banning it from the classroom. But I think, like what you said, transparency is the most important thing. If you're going to use it, you need to own up to it. You can't lie about it. You can't say that this is technically your work, because unfortunately, technically it's not. To a certain extent, you are not coming up with the idea. You're not creating the idea. But, when it comes to grammar, English as a second language, that kind of stuff, that's a whole nother conversation that I don't even know if I could insert myself into, because I don't know enough about it.
Okay, no, fair enough. But before I get Joel's call here, on that point of transparency, again, the implication in the New York Magazine piece, I think we all agree, pretty hyperbolic piece, but at least painting a picture of a rapidly changing landscape on a lot of campuses. The implication is that transparency is not there, that plenty of students feel like they can get away with it. They don't have to be honest about where they generated the material, whether they did it themselves or put a prompt into ChatGPT or did some combination thereof. And so there is lying, whatever the semantic term you want. Is it plagiarism? Is it cheating? Maybe there will be a new term that comes out of this. I don't know. But I don't know exactly how accurate that is. And so Kyle, when New York Magazine is kind of presenting this picture that the transparency that you want has been entirely set aside, and students are in large numbers are just getting away with it. I know you don't feel like it's quite that bad, but in some cases, I would assume on every campus, someone has done that, right? Kids are, I'd say kids.
Yeah.
That is, I apologize. That's the wrong word. Young adults, people, human beings, they're doing it at every level, at every age. So asking people to be transparent is one thing. What's the next step of the policy that give it some teeth?
I think it fundamentally forces us to ask what we're doing in the classroom and why. If we're not changing how we teach, if we're not changing how we interact with students, if we're not changing how we design our assignments, we're going to be in a bad place. And I think we've done this to ourselves to some degree. What's the story that we tell students of why they should finish high school to get to a good college? Why do you go to a good college? We heard it from what Lee was saying, right? He's saying, I'm doing this because I want to either meet my partner or more, the story you would get at Brockport is I want to get a job. And we've told students that's why they're going to college. So if we're telling them it's not to build the skills to potentially get a job in this adapting landscape, but rather just to get the job, you get the degree you have the paper that you can show to the potential employer, well then why would they not take the easiest route? Because it is simply trying to get to that goal. So I think we have to take a step back, which we should have done already, and said, what are we actually getting out of the classroom? And that's where it's useful to talk to students, and I do this at the start of every semester. You can have a policy in the syllabus. A lot of students don't read the syllabus. I don't even expect them to read the syllabus. I'd like them to, but I don't expect them to. But if on the first day or the second day, you can sit down and say, okay, what do we want this classroom space to be? What is the point of being here? And students will list what they actually want to get out of it. Some of it is about connection with me, connection with other students. So clearly, if we're just turning to AI, we're not getting that. People talk about it being a place of thought, a place of creativity, a place to work through ideas. If we're turning to AI, we're not getting that. So hopefully, this doesn't solve the problem. I'm not just like some utopian thinker where I believe just talking to students, they'll immediately buy in. But at least that's a starting point. If they can actually help and say, here's what we think the policy should be, it gives them a little bit more buy-in. If it simply turns to that top-down, I'm going to tell you it's cheating, and then I'm going to punish you if you do it, then it just turns professors into police. And it makes it really difficult to actually police it because it's harder and harder to recognize when it's AI. Then you engage in that weird thing where a student turns in a paper and then you email them and say it sounds like AI and they say it isn't. And do you really want to have that argument? Because it just completely destroys it.
Have you had to have that discussion with students?
I have.
It's really awkward, isn't it?
Oh, it's incredibly awkward. And it destroys the dynamic. And sometimes it's with very good students where they'll turn in a paper. And I've had these instances where a student turns in a paper, it reads like AI, pretty sure it's AI, but I'm not 100% sure. So I email them and they say, no, I just used it for grammar. Where do you go from there? If you want to come in, if you want to bring them to your office and talk to them, you've already destroyed it, right?
It's awful. I mean,
Yeah.
Not a great solution. So tell me if I'm wrong here then, Kyle. Part of what you're saying is you want to convince your classroom that using AI, or really just relying almost entirely on something like GPT, is bad for them. But recognizing that for some or many of them, bad for them, you'd have to convince them somehow that what they think is the purpose of college is not going to benefit from them successfully getting away with it with GPT, which is part of that conversation to me might be, hey, you may end up with the degree, the piece of paper, as you say, that helps you get the job. But there's going to be changing standards in the future. This is going to change everything. And if you can't think your way through problem solving, you will not be able to fake it. And if you just get this degree and spend all this money to come here, and you think you're going to go out and get a job, and that's the ROI that you want, and you may not be able to do that anymore if you just use GPT. Is that an effective way to describe it? Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And it goes beyond just saying building skills to get a job, but what are you trying to get out of your time in this space?
Yeah.
You're going to be spending 4 years taking all these different classes. This is going to be your life. What do you want to be doing in those 4 years? And if it's simply plugging something into a computer and getting a response and turning that in, you're not going to feel very good about yourself, right? So even on just that, not only you're not building those skills, on that emotional level, you're not getting something out of it. You're not learning anything about yourself other than giving into this temptation and feeling bad. And you're also not building connections with the people around you. I've had other faculty, friends at both Brockport and at other schools who've gone the route of banning screens, even in the classroom. I haven't gone that far. I haven't been as brave to do that. But in their teaching evaluations, they've had students thank them and say, look, I actually enjoyed it. I was able to connect with the people around me. I was able to think about this stuff. And I know, and I'm impressed by students by being this self-aware. I don't know if I would be this self-aware, but saying, if you didn't do that, I would have been looking at my phone, right? So sometimes students know that and have a sense of something that's better for them. But again, we fall into the trap of saying, well, they did it, so then they're hypocrites. And I don't buy that. I think that's a bad argument. And I think if we look at our own lives, we all can point to something that we know is bad for us. Social
I'm
media.
on my phone way too much.
Yeah, social media, smoking cigarettes, any of these things, right? Why do we get a personal trainer?
Yeah.
The personal trainer usually isn't teaching us an exercise that we don't know, but they're saying do the exercise,
Yeah.
right? And we know it's good for us. So
Like,
that's
why am I paying this guy?
Yeah.
I should just be doing it.
You could do it at home. You don't need to go to a gym, right?
Yeah.
You could get the equipment, it'll be cheaper. But we know going to that place, having that person yell at you, that helps.
That's understanding the psychology or the sociology of the situation. So, Natasha, for you, when you think about why you are in school, you're on a microphone, but you can be as blunt as you want. What's the purpose of going to RIT and getting the degree that you're getting?
Yeah, I came to RIT because they have a great photojournalism program, and I knew that going in, and I researched the professors and I researched the alum, and I knew that I could get the education that I needed to become successful. But I think kind of a little bit off topic from what we were talking about earlier, but I do think higher education has become commodified to a certain extent. It's no longer a learning institute. They are money-making institutes to a certain extent. I don't think all of higher education is just about money, but a lot of it is. And I think a lot of students realize that they spend all this money, they get this degree, and they come out, there's no job, right? They have a degree, they learned it, there's no job waiting for them. And I think a lot of students have taken that and turned it into, well, if I'm not going to get a job out of this and I'm just going to get a piece of paper, why do I need to learn all of it when all these people with these skills and these degrees, they're not getting jobs? How am I going to get a job? Even if I slave over my homework assignments and I learn the material, there's nothing waiting for me at the end of this. So what's the ROI?
So you feel like a client and less like a student?
Personally, for me, not as much. I do see that a lot more with like engineering students and software students because those industries are so oversaturated, because a lot of students go into them not because they love it, but because it pays really well and they know they can get a stable job within that industry, and that's not the same anymore. And they feel, Chung-In Lee, like we were just talking about, he made his original thing based off of LeetCode code because he felt like it wasn't accurate to how he should be interviewed for the jobs that he was looking for. And that's why he started down that whole trail with being kicked out of Columbia and everything. But I don't see that personally for myself, but I do know that other people feel that way. And that's why people like Chung-In Lee turn to cheating and trying to absolve themselves from, oh, it's fine to use ChatGPT because everyone's using it because they feel like higher education is failing them.
So last question before I get to some feedback from listeners then. What do you think as a student, as a rising senior, what is, at least in the classrooms you're in, you can't speak for everybody, but what is the kind of messaging that will be effective, that will convince more students to say, I am not going to just use ChatGPT. I'm not going to rely on that, and I'm not going to lie about it. I'm going to try to do this assignment the way the professor wants me to do it.
Mm-hmm. I think being upfront and more confrontational with students of you are going to fail in the real world if you cheat your whole way through college. You are going to have no soft skills. You are not going to learn anything. You're going to pay all this money for a degree that's going to be useless because you have nothing to give other than you can type numbers into a computer and have it spit out an answer at you.
And that will be clear on the other side?
I think it is, right? Because I think they need to be a little bit more transparent of like, this isn't just this idea that no one knows how to grasp of like, we don't know what the future is going to be like with ChatGPT and generative AI and stuff like that. We do know that if you lie your way through college and you don't do your assignments to the extent that the people in those articles were doing, you are going to have no skills for the real workforce. And when you get into those jobs and they realize that, you cheated your whole way through
or into those interviews.
Exactly, those interviews, and they realize you cheated your way into it, they're going to go, why would we hire you? You have nothing to give us, right?
And so for 4 years or however long, you thought you were setting yourself up and ChatGPT was helping you get the grades.
Yeah.
But it turns out, without the actual knowledge on how to do things, you're in trouble.
Yeah, shocker. When you can't do your job, people don't want to hire you to do a job.
So to me, it's both. I mean, Kyle and Natasha are giving us two different ideas. I mean, really a lot of intertwined ideas. But it's, if you're just there for the ROI, what's the job I can get? How well does it pay? What career path do I need to get there? And what degree on paper do I need? Then just relying on GPT or other programs is potentially disastrous for you. If you're there because you want to be in a place of learning, if you want to grow, if you want to become a more, thoughtful human being and pick up skills that may help you in myriad ways, that's also bad. So these are effective arguments. It's just a question of if the marketplace of students, if we want to commodify everything, is going to buy it. So, all right, there's a lot here. Joel in Rochester has been waiting. Hello, Joel. Go ahead.
Hey, I want to give it some concrete examples of how this plays out in the classroom. I've been teaching in higher education for the last 27 years, and about 2 years ago in spring semester of 2023, I had the opportunity to teach at SUNY Geneseo, and I was teaching a course in history, a local and public history course, and I thought it was pretty clever that I had students, because SUNY Geneseo has a rather large education program, I thought it would be pretty clever to have students read basically a children's novel that dealt with this Civil War reenactor and his life in Ohio as he not only participated in the Civil War reenactments, but then also learned about this Civil War soldier whose gender and sexuality who was being questioned. And so here's this kid in the present day learning about this Civil War soldier, and the novel brings up questions about identity and all these great issues. And I thought, well, let's have my students do a book review of this book. And this is a class of 25 students, and about 5 to 7 students turned in essays that didn't make any sense. So, for example, they took the main character and they had it as if he was the soldier in the Civil War. Some of the students turned in papers as if the book that they were reading was a history, or some other work of nonfiction. Some of the students played it out as if, the actual soldier that you're reading about was in the present. And so none of these essays made any sense. And when they're asked to do, 1 or 2 sentences essentially of summary for this book, the students were unable to do it. So they turned these essays. I looked at them and I was like, well, geez, this doesn't make any sense. And so I reached out, kind of what Kyle said he does, and said, hey, this doesn't make any sense. Can you explain how you're reading this book this way? And I remember one of the students said, well, I already turned back in the book that I rented, so I can't really, explain what happened, but I'm willing to rewrite it if you'll let me. And so I let 5 or 7 students rewrite their papers, and they turned in their essays, and they made more sense the second time around. But, I didn't think anything more of it. I just felt like I can't prove that they plagiarized, and their excuses don't make too much sense, but what can I do as a teacher? And so then I fast forward to this spring, and I'm teaching at RIT, and I have a class of about 15 students. It's basically an American Studies course. And I assign the students a prompt that basically asks them to prove that the American dream is a fiction or it's a myth. And so I get a paper, I start reading through the papers, I get to the 7th paper. Student has written that a really good paper, and it's broken into sections and subheadings and makes a good argument. It has 6 really amazing sources, one of which is a Pew Charitable Trust research piece. And I think, wow, this is pretty good, and I grade it pretty highly. And then a few students later, I read a student's essay, and it seems similar. It has the same breakdown. Instead of using the word myth, it uses the word fiction, or it uses the word illusion. And I print out the papers, I put them side by side, and I start underlining, and lots of the material in the first paper mirrors the second paper, the same number of sources, most of the same sources. And only then did I realize, and I brought this up to students, I actually had them read it, that I was dealing with students who had used GAI to submit their essays. And it's kind of honestly threw me for a loop. I'm not quite sure, how to proceed, and kind of like what Kyle said, where do you go with this? Because you can't in this case, it was pretty clear cut, and I let the students rewrite their essays. But I left that semester feeling like a lot of the student work that I was reading was not their own. They didn't come up with the ideas even for the essays. And when we used to call it plagiarism, when the students submitted work that was not their own ideas, not their own words, it was oftentimes pretty clear cut because you could search and find terms or essays, or in some cases entire essays, or some cases entire paragraphs from online. Now it's become more and more difficult. And I'm not sure it's 100% of the students at RIT, but I'm going to guess it's probably 25% of the students at RIT. And I'm kind of left shaking my head, feeling like, where do you go from here? I even had a policy on my syllabus that says had banned this, and yet the students did that. So it's not really clear for me. And you can have all the discussions you want in class, which we also had about AI and GAI, and yet students are still willing to turn in work that's not their own, that's created by a machine or whatever.
Well, Joel, I appreciate that account. And so here's what I want to do. First of all, thank you for that phone call. I want to take our only break, and when we come back, we're going to build on Joel's call, and we're going to talk about some questions that listeners have been expressing, which is our schools, whether it's high school, certainly at the college level, are you assessing different? So are you doing more in-person assessment? Are you doing more timed writing assessment in class only with no screens? Do you have to change how you assess? Are there different ways of testing? Is that fair, and does it work? And what do you do when you encounter students who are not being honest? So Joel just kind of talked about, hey, it was on the syllabus, it was discussed, and here he was finding a chunk of the students still doing it this way. So I've got a lot to work through here on the other side of this break, and we're going to use Joel's call to do that. Dr. Kyle Green is with us. Kyle's an associate professor in the Department of Sociology at SUNY Brockport. Natasha Kaiser in studio, a rising senior in the photojournalism program at RIT, and an intern here with us at WXXI News. We are right back next on Connections.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from Mary Cariola Center, providing education and life skills solutions designed to empower individuals and the families of those with complex disabilities. Mary Cariola Center, transforming lives of people with disabilities. More at marycariola.org.
Public media is at risk. Please join WXXI's President Chris Hastings for a virtual town hall Tuesday night at 6. It will be an online discussion about WXXI's mission, the impact we have in the community, and the fight to save federal funding. That's Tuesday night at 6. To learn more and register for the event, visit WXXI.org.
This is Connections. I'm Evan Dawson. I want to take a moment to just share a little gratitude. We've got two outstanding guests speaking in very thoughtful ways about AI in the classroom, ChatGPT, and this is going to be the start of many conversations on this subject, and we're going to go in a lot of different directions. I want to continue to invite your feedback, listeners and viewers, if you're watching on YouTube, and we'll share a lot today. We're going to share more this summer. I also want to mention, we're working on our own policy at XXI, so just a little admission here. I have never used ChatGPT. I haven't even played with the prompts to see what comes up. However, can I mention what happened this morning? Is that all right, producer? Producer Megan Mack had never used it either, and this morning asked AI to write an essay on ducks. Something general, a duck. Took 15 seconds, and it generated a pretty good essay on ducks. Learned a lot about ducks. 15 seconds for that prompt. So I've never used it. Nothing you're going to hear come out of my mouth is written by ChatGPT or any other programs. I'm not going to tell you that I'm above everything. Kyle made a really good point. This is not going to be effective if we just look down our nose at people like, oh, you use GPT. Oh, wow, you're the lower form of our species. We're not going to do that. We can't do that. But we do need to talk about the ramifications and how quickly this has become adopted, and what matters most in terms of dealing with it, helping students use it as a tool, but not subverting actual work. So let me read an email, and then which dovetails with Joel's call, and we're going to let our guest talk about what Joel said. First of all, Nan, who is a professor of geoscience at Hobart and William Smith Colleges. Nan says, when I first brought a calculator home from school in the 1970s, my father was outraged because he was convinced that having a machine do arithmetic for me would destroy my learning. In the 2020s, I watched my own children accelerate their learning of advanced math, calculus, because they used a calculator to quickly graph functions that took me hours. The calculator is a tool, as are generative language models like GPT. As a teacher, I am challenged to learn how to leverage this tool to accelerate learning. It's early days for me, and my first learning was that my old assignments no longer work, just like the pages and pages of adding practice that I did as a kid. We need to acknowledge and support the heavy lift that GPT and similar technology is handing to our teachers. That's from Nan. It's a really smart email that says, the sky didn't fall with the calculator, but it did change how you teach. It did change what you expect. It did change what you can do. If the sky's not falling now, it means we're going to recognize the old assignments or the old tests may not work as well. And Joel is saying he is assigning essays and he's feeling kind of at his wit's end now. So Kyle, as a professor, do you need to test differently now?
Yes.
Okay. And have you figured out how to do that?
Not exactly. But I would. One thing I do like, both of the caller in and the email both brought up very good points. If we're simply recycling the same old critiques that come up every 10 years, when it's the calculator, when it's Wikipedia, when it's the internet, if we're saying the exact same thing, it's probably not that insightful, right? There has to be something new and something specific. And I do think AI is different, so we should focus on what's different about it. As for what Joel is saying, it's incredibly demoralizing, especially when you have an assignment like he brought up. He thought the assignment was really cool. He thought the students would engage with it. He thought that it was good for them. And then to see someone not bother engage, that's even more hurtful than just like some throwaway assignment that you have. So we do have to come up with different assignments. If you have someone simply review a book, if you have someone watch a documentary and tell me what that documentary was about, turns out that's not a great assignment. And those are often the assignments that I give when I'm not sure what else I can do. If we change the assignments to have to be more, what is your personal connection with that thing? And then take it in an interesting direction. You could still draw on AI, but you could at least push them to try to do something different. The other thing is more and more have gone towards process-oriented assignments. And so even the class itself, meaning I'm not going to focus on, I have some bar that you have to clear. This is an A, this is a B, this is a C, and this is a D. If you're telling the students you have to get to an A and they're already insecure, why wouldn't they turn to AI? You're already giving them that push to do it if they're worried about their grade, which matters. We tell students that grades matter. If instead it's about process and I want you to actually demonstrate to me how you thought about this and how your thinking changed along the way, and if you do that, you're going to get a good grade, hopefully that encourages the student to be, again, more transparent, more honest about what they're doing and say, I can start at a point of not knowing. That's not a problem. But I can show each few weeks along in the semester something additional, and you can't use AI for that.
What do you make of teachers or professors who are saying, from now on, all assessment is happening in the classroom, you're not handing in any work from home?
It works. I mean, a lot of people are going back to the blue book, right? You're going to handwrite it, and I'm going to see you do it. That does work, and in social theory, I do use that. So I have them do a lot of assignments where they could potentially be drawing on AI. However, if you're drawing on AI and actually learning the material, well, then I don't have quite as much of a critique, right? Because at a certain point, you're going to sit down and you have to write it out. One thing that does worry me is more and more professors are turning towards a program. I can't remember the name of the program. It's called like Ragnarok, which is, I don't think it's Ragnarus or Ragnarok, but that you actually install on your machine. And when you're taking a test, it will make sure that you can't open up another window, or it will actually even monitor what you're doing. That potentially works. There's ways around it. I know there's technology. Whenever new technology comes out, there's another technology that counters it. The person's designing a new way to get around it. My problem is it changes the dynamic and relationship again, right? It's telling a student, I'm going to watch every little thing that you do to catch you, and then you'll be punished. That's not what I want to do fundamentally as a professor.
Mm-hmm. Well, so a couple other things for Kyle before I turn to Natasha. Got a couple of emails from listeners who want to know, do you have any tech programs or apps that will allow you to say, okay, here's Natasha's essay. I'm plugging this in, and now this piece of tech that I'm going to use will tell me if AI created it. Is there anything that works like that?
Yes and no. So at Brockport, we use Brightspace. As part of Brightspace, which is the learning management system, there's something called Turnitin, and it runs it through some program, and it tells us if it's traditional plagiarizing, but also tells us what percentage. And it doesn't say for sure. It says we predict that this percentage is AI. And then there's a ton of programs that you can use online as well. Often the same companies that put out the AI software put out the AI detection software. So they're winning on both ends, right? I mean, which is also a kind of funny thing. The problem is, going back to the example I gave earlier, if a student writes their own paper and then uses it for grammar, that potentially makes it read like AI, and it will trigger the AI detection software. And then it's a question, thinking about what Joel is saying, do we want to send that email to the student? Do we want to have that conversation? Students also know if you accuse them of using AI, they can say, I just used it for grammar. So they know that as well. And then it's a question of, how do I know whether you're telling the truth? Which is not the same as when someone uses someone else's paper, where you can literally say, this is what you took it from.
And you risk rupturing a relationship.
Yes. And changing, how do we want to spend our time as a professor, right? Do we want to spend most of our time? And this is one of the challenges, especially when you're teaching an online course, you get 30 papers turned in. And I hate that the first thing I often ask myself is, did this student write it?
Oof. All right. A couple of years ago, a lot of teachers were telling me, I mean, a lot of friends and regular callers to the show, guests on the show. I talked to college professors, high school teachers, and there was a lot of feeling like, I'm going to know if you used AI to write this. It doesn't have a soul. And I can tell in writing that is computer generated or program generated, robot generated. 2 years later, I see some of the work that AI is generating, and I think, and I think from some of the surveys and some of the examinations, professors aren't as good as they think they are at sussing out the difference, are they? Just the reality. And AI is the worst it's ever going to be right now at writing a song, at writing an essay, at writing a poem, at analyzing a legal brief. It's the worst it's ever going to be. It's only going to get better, and it's already pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah, it's getting better. I mean, I still feel like I can see it. There's certain tells, but it's getting more and more difficult. And as you're pointing out, it's going to get better. Now, if you have an assignment, you can tailor assignments so the writing will avoid that. However, one of the sad things that's happening is more and more I'm happy when I see a mistake, a traditional mistake, because I know that wasn't AI. That's not a good place to be, where we actually want more mistakes in the paper because it seems more real.
Yeah, just wait till the students figure out that a few mistakes will make their work harder to detect. I'm being cynical.
And
I don't want to be cynical.
Yeah, but there still are ways. So, I mean, a lot of times AI avoids making a specific claim. There's still cases, we see a lot of this where this is well publicized, where AI has these, what they call hallucinations, where they cite a book that doesn't actually exist, or they come up with something that isn't real. It often uses a bunch of complex words where one simple word would make more sense, and students don't write in that overly complicated manner. So there's still ways to find it, but it's getting more difficult, and it means that time I would be taking to give the student feedback saying, hey, I really like this idea, but consider going this way, or have you considered using this data source or approaching it from this perspective? Instead, I'm using that time to think about, is this generated by the student or by artificial intelligence? And so that's a waste of everyone's time.
Natasha, how do you feel about in-class assessment only? Nothing take home. You're not handing in a paper. You've got a time limit. You might write it by hand. You might type it, but you're in class generating the work only. How do you feel about that as a student?
I think, if we need to find a way to circumnavigate the use of AI in the classrooms, I think that's a valid way to go about it. I know that there are browser locks, kind of like what we were talking about earlier, that lock down your browser so you can't open other tabs for when you are doing asynchronous work or for these online classes. And I think if we have to find a way to circumnavigate the use of AI in the classrooms to ensure that students are making their own work, then we have to consider, these are the best things that we can do so the student population is still learning something, right? And like we were talking about earlier, it's unfortunate that we have to find these workarounds because it ruins students' relationships with their teachers, right? Like, you're constantly questioning, did the student write it? And then if you question the student, if the student did write it, it's like, dang, this just made me think differently of you because now you think I'm not an honest student. And it's environmental impacts, right? Like, it just keeps snowballing to the point where it's like, what good is coming out of this in general, where we shouldn't start making plans to just not use it at all.
Have you had any classes where a professor has explicitly said we are changing how we are assessing?
No, not personally, because most of my stuff is art based. So the creative process cannot happen inside the classroom for us personally. But I do know that there are faculty that have just had to completely overhaul the way that they're teaching at RIT because it's such a problem with their majors, with their classes that they're teaching. They have to reevaluate what would be best for the student's learning model to not include generative AI.
But think about how sad that is. And this is not, I don't like going towards the consumer model and thinking about education, but you're literally having a student say, I pay for my education. I pay for this limited amount of time in the classroom I'm supposed to be learning, and I'm willing to sacrifice some of that time to force the assessment into that space. That could have been a day where we're talking about new ideas, where we're learning more. Instead, we're bringing the assessment into the classroom. That's a depressing result.
Let me get Justin in Irondequoit who's been waiting. Hey, Justin, go ahead.
Hey guys, thanks for taking my call. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, so originally my problem with like education was teaching to the test because you're not teaching the kids how to think for themselves. And then I think AI has kind of taken that to the next level. But also, you guys were talking about how, you know, what do they want to get out of the classroom? And we're telling them at the end it's to get a job. But, you know, they're hearing, and I think everyone's hearing, that AI is going to take away, 100% of manual labor jobs and 80% of programming jobs, or, all these jobs are going to be taken by AI. So doesn't the whole educational system kind of need to be reevaluated? Like, what are we doing here if AI is just going to be doing all the work? Thanks for taking my call. I'll hang up and listen.
Yeah, Justin, thank you. Well, let me start with Dr. Green. What do you think, Kyle?
Or throwing the hard question to
Sure,
me.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we should be rethinking what education is, and we need to be rethinking about what our promise is. We can't simply promise you get the degree and then you're slotted into a particular job. I think that we have to be teaching students to be more adaptable, to have a skill set that can enter lots of different spaces. We don't know what the future will hold. Now, I do think this is a little bit, hopefully not too much of a tangent, but there is this idea that the growth of AI technology is inevitable, and we're told that over and over. The people often telling us that are the companies that have invested in it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
These AI companies are not making money yet, right? They're not making money through AI. Rather, they're companies that have massive amounts of investment in those technologies. So they're saying this is going to grow and give us a ton of money in the future. And they often get money through working with universities who pay large amounts to have access to that program. It isn't inevitable because it does rely on material things. It relies on all those servers. It relies on billions of dollars in investment. It relies on energy. It relies on data scraping. It relies on land. We are making those choices. Now, is it probably going to happen? Yes. I'm both pointing out that it isn't inevitable, but I'm also cynical, but I do think it will happen. But we do get to make choices along the way.
Anything you want to add, Natasha?
I think I have the same idea. I think we need to stop being so complacent with the idea that it's going to happen and that it is inevitable. If we really want to make change, we need to make sure that we're not complacent in the idea of, well, it's going to happen. There's nothing I can do about it. And I need to just change the learning model in the classroom to adapt to that, because I don't know personally what faculty in colleges and high schools can do to circumnavigate the whole use of AI in the classroom, but we need to stop with the idea that it's going to happen, it's inevitable. We just have to get used to it, because a lot of people don't. I know, like myself, I don't want to just get used to the idea that there are these machines that just think for us, right?
Yeah, that scares me, for sure. Let me read a note from a colleague who says, if we stop using the paper or the essay as the main tool by which to keep students engaged in the material and track their progress, we won't have to worry about ChatGPT dumbing people down. Ban screens and go back to debate. Otherwise, it's just teachers using AI to make lessons and students using AI to answer. That brought me back to the New York Magazine piece. Let me read this passage from the New York Magazine piece. It's not just the students. Multiple AI platforms now offer tools to leave AI-generated feedback on students' essays, which raises the possibility that AIs are now evaluating AI-generated papers, reducing the entire academic exercise to a conversation between two robots, or maybe even just one. Ooh, I really hope that is not happening, Kyle. Would you use AI to evaluate student work?
No. And
Do you think it's acceptable for professors
No,
to do it?
I don't think they should do it. I think I can see why it's seductive. And this is, again, we've built this system. We have more students in the classroom, which means that it takes longer to evaluate work, and it's often where I don't give as much feedback as I'd like to. So it is very seductive. I won't use it in part just because I know how much energy it uses. And for me, it often goes back to that. And if any listener is curious, MIT just put out a review looking at how much energy and land and resources it actually requires, and it's horrifying. So maybe we can get it to save me some time, but maybe my time isn't worth it.
David writes from Vancouver, Canada, listening on the WXXI mobile app. He says, all written assignments in the classroom is a recipe for a huge loss of depth of learning,
Yes.
albeit nowhere near as bad as cheating with AI. So David's talking about the trade-off there, but he doesn't love the idea of just writing in the classroom, which as a professor you understand?
I agree completely. I never used tests in the past for that reason. I want people to go sociology is going and thinking about ideas. You're thinking about complex systems. You're thinking about interactions that happen between people. We don't know the answer that we're going to end at within 30 minutes. You should get to go home. You should get to talk it through with someone else. So I agree with him completely. That's a very good point.
How about debate? We're just going to get people talking in class, and we're going to assess the students based on how well they express their ideas.
I love that. I love that idea. I mean, I love to talk, if you couldn't tell. So I think the debate and exchange of ideas is one of the best ways for students to be able to learn and to rethink their own personal ideas of how topics are covered and subjects are covered. And I think bringing debate back to the classroom is a form of circumnavigating that use of AI is good.
So much really, really thoughtful feedback from listeners. I know people are thinking about these issues. I'm going to try not to be the sky is falling guy, because right when this hour started, one of the regular listeners sent me this. Old man shakes fist at AI coming up on Connections. Am I the old man yelling at clouds, team? Rob, yes? I mean, we can both yell at clouds. But let's try to be productive. We're going to spend a lot of the summer tracking how it's changing education, hopefully for the better, ideally not for the worse, with really smart people. Natasha Kaiser, a rising senior in the photojournalism program at RIT. Thank you for being back with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And Dr. Kyle Green is an associate professor in the Department of Sociology at SUNY Brockport. Great having you. Thank you.
A lot of fun.
More Connections coming up in a moment.
This program is a production of WXXI Public Radio. The views expressed do not necessarily represent those of this station, its staff, management, or underwriters. The broadcast is meant for the private use of our audience. Any rebroadcast or use in another medium without expressed written consent of WXXI is strictly prohibited. Connections with Evan Dawson is available as a podcast. Just click on the Connections link at WXXInews.org.
Support for your public radio station comes from our members and from United Way of Greater Rochester and the Finger Lakes, serving the community for more than 100 years, dedicated to creating a future where everyone's basic needs are met so all can thrive. More at unitedwayrocflx.org.